Hi everyone, and welcome to the video on where we discuss the Union government's income, expenditure, assets, and liabilities. The budget is going to come in a few days, and you need to understand it is very, very important for you to understand what the assets, the liabilities, the receipts, or income and expenditures of the government are, because that is what is presented in the Union government budget. Now, if I tell you, think of the government as a financial entity and tell me what will be the biggest assets, biggest liabilities of the government. Think and try to make a guess. And once I tell you what the assets and liabilities of the government look like, tell us in the comments if you were able to guess it correctly. All right. So, moving on, first, let me show you what the balance sheet of a government looks like. And it's very different from a normal company or a business balance sheet or even a personal balance sheet. Okay. So this is what a stylized government balance sheet looks like. What do you mean by stylized? It's a general format, right? So you can see on the asset side, what is the biggest and the most important asset that any government has? It's the power to tax the people, right? Because that is where most of the government receipts come from. And as per their own discretion, the government can raise the taxes or tax rates, reduce the tax rates, tax different items, or give you deductions, etc., etc. Right? It's completely under the government's control. Now, if you had to put a number to what is the this asset, in terms of rupees, then you would want to take the net present value of all the future tax revenues. All right. Apart from that, what are the other major assets that any government has? So they are real assets, which include, a lot of equipment, military equipment, infrastructure, buildings, roads, ports, airports, everything that is owned by the government. And not only that, all the natural resources of the country are also assets of the government. Think about all the mineral wealth, even the air around you or the water in your rivers. Okay. It is all of it comes under the purview of the government. If you know to use the airwaves to send signals through air, you need a license. Okay. So the government basically has all these natural resources as assets. And how does it monetize these assets? By licensing them. You need license to send signals through the air. So you have your 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G licenses. You need a license to, extract mineral wealth. Okay. All of these things. So those are the real assets of the government. Finally, they own equity stakes in a lot of public sector enterprises. Think of State Bank of India, LIC, all of these big enterprises. The government owns a good enough equity in them, right? So it has some value. And finally, other financial assets, which might include cash that the government has or loans it has given out to states or some entities, and a lot of other things, right? Coming to the liability, if these are the massive assets of the government, what are the liabilities of the government? The biggest liability is essentially called the social liability. That is what the people expect that the government will spend on their welfare, including education, including providing services like law and order, police, military, etc., etc. Right? Infrastructure like roads, water, all of those things. So this is the social liability that the government has, and that is the biggest liability. Apart from that, the second biggest liability obviously is the debt that the government has. All right. So this is, if you want to visualize what are the assets and liabilities of the government, this is how you visualize it. Coming to the P&L that we see for most of the companies, uh, for the government, it is not P&L, profit and loss. It is essentially receipt and expenditure account. Okay, so where the government gives an account of all the receipts or income that it has, and all the expenditure that it does. Okay, so this is the actual snapshot of the last year's budget, which is the budget for FY23. And as you can see, you have receipts and expenditure divided into a few parts. So receipts are in revenue receipts and capital receipts. What does it mean? Revenue receipts are those receipts which are recurring in nature. Think of tax. Okay, you have to pay it every year. Think of non-tax revenue receipts like penalties, like duties, like royalties, right? All of these things the government keeps on collecting every year. Now, so what are these capital receipts? Capital receipts are essentially uh, any form of receipt that you have got either by reducing or selling an asset or by taking on loan or a liability. Okay, reducing or selling of asset means when the government sold stake in LIC, it received some money. That is a capital receipt. Okay, and if they are recovering some loan, again capital receipt. If they are borrowing money, increasing their liability, okay, again a capital receipt. All right. So I hope you have understood the difference between revenue receipt and capital receipts. Coming on the expenditure side, what are the expenditures of the government? Expenditure are basically divided into four parts, three of which are called as revenue expenditure, and the fourth is the capital expenditure. Capital expenditure is that money which is going to build capital assets or repay long-term liabilities. Okay, so if the government builds a building, it's a capital expenditure. Builds a port, builds a road, it's a capital expenditure. If the government pays off a big loan, again, it's a capital expenditure, reduces the loan, right? On the other hand, uh, all the expenditure which goes into recurring items like salaries of government employees, all the office expenditure that happens in all the government offices, rent that the government pays to use some spaces, all of these things are revenue expenditure. Okay, and then of course you have interest payments, right? We saw in the balance sheet that government debt is a big thing, and obviously you have to pay some interest on it, which is your interest payments. And finally you have grants. Okay, grants are essentially one way expenditure that the government does in order to facilitate something, right? So they can give grants to other states, to some organizations, or maybe even some private organizations, right? So all of these things come under grants. So this in total is your income or receipt and expenditure account of the union government. And finally, you have some deficits. Okay, what do you mean by deficit? For a profit making company, we say profit or loss. Government is not a profit making entity. So we say either it's a surplus or a deficit. Okay, so when your expenditures are more than your receipts, you have a deficit. Now, deficit can be of multiple types. Two deficits are widely tracked. You have the revenue deficit and the fiscal deficit. Revenue deficit is basically all your revenue expenditure minus your revenue receipt. Simple. What is your fiscal deficit? Fiscal deficit is nothing but your total expenditure, okay, minus your revenue receipts, your recovery of loans, and your other receipts. Okay, so all the income of the government, uh, either from revenue or capital receipts, except for borrowings. Okay, essentially, fiscal deficit is the shortfall between your expenditure and income. And this is the most widely tracked number across multiple countries. So I hope you have now understood what do you mean by the asset, liabilities, receipts, and expenditure of the union government. To get more such content, please subscribe to our channel. We keep posting such videos, and press the bell icon to stay updated. Thank you.